Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And with us tonight, a one-time Labour leadership hopeful now leading the charge against Brexit, Chuka Umunna, the Conservative Minister for Prisons, Sam Gyimah, the newly elected leader of UKIP, Henry Bolton, the Deputy Editor of the Sunday Times, Sarah Baxter, and the former Finance Minister of Greece who tried and failed to negotiate a way out of debt with the EU and accused them of naked blackmail, Yanis Varoufakis. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, as ever, of course, at home, you can have your say. Hashtag is BBCQT on Twitter and Facebook. You can text us on 83981. You can push the red button to see what others are saying. And just before we take our first question, we did say Priti Patel, the former International Development Secretary, would be here on the panel, but after her resignation, she resigned. I'm glad Sam Gyimah has managed to get here in her place. And one other thing, if you were watching last week's Question Time, you know it was rather curtailed. You might like to know that the audience member who collapsed is back home and feeling much better. Good. Let's take our first question. And it comes from Joanne Ryby, please. Joanne.
How far would Donald Trump have to go before our government formally rescinded his invitation for a state visit?
Yanis Varoufakis.
He has already crossed the line some time ago. He is the President of the United States of America, which is a great ally of the United Kingdom. But he's not a great ally of his own people. And this visit would be greatly divisive in this country. It would create an incongruity in the Houses of Parliament. And there is absolutely no reason why he should be invited at this stage.
Would you formally rescind an invitation
Yes.
that was formally given on behalf of
Yes.
the Queen? You'd withdraw it? Right.
Absolutely.
All right. Sam Gyimah.
I think Yanis makes a very good point. What Donald Trump did recently, I think, has definitely crossed a line. And it takes great bravery to stand up to your enemies. It takes even more bravery to stand up to your friends. And I think Theresa May was right to rebuke him on Twitter for his comments and his retweets of Britain First. We are a tolerant and decent country. We are open, and I think it was right that she did that. In terms of whether or not Donald Trump comes to this country, I am personally deeply uncomfortable about it. I am deeply uncomfortable because he is deliberately divisive, and this will be divisive at a time that we are trying to unite our country. The invitation has been sent and it's been accepted. It's above my pay grade in terms of what happens next, but I think I am deeply uncomfortable about it.
Chuka.
Well, I think the first thing to say, I think we've got to acknowledge that the US is bigger than Donald Trump. And there are a huge number of Americans, I have an American family, who find him as abhorrent as we do. I mean, let's just, be frank about it. This guy is a racist, he's a misogynist, he's an Islamophobe. I mean, he campaigned promoting hate. And what he's now doing in retweeting Britain First is basically doing so in our country as well. And I think the thing that I find most concerning is this kind of sense, oh, well, it's Donald Trump. This is what he does. It's another shocking thing that he does. But the problem with that is you are normalizing hatred if you approach it in that way, just because he is the President of the United States. And I think if you normalize hatred and the kinds of things that he has said, the kinds of things that he stands for and promotes, you are going down a very dangerous road indeed, which is why I think the Prime Minister should be big enough to say, look, I got this wrong. In fact, I probably shouldn't have invited him in the first place. Rescind the invitation. Carrying on with it makes us look needy, and I fear normalises hatred, which is not what we should be doing.
But
It doesn't normalise it. I mean, the Prime Minister rebuked him on Twitter, and today she went even further. She's made it very clear that, yes, the United States as a country is our ally, but Donald Trump retweeting those tweets from Britain First is unacceptable. And I think that is what we want our Prime Minister to be doing.
Why not disinvite him? That is the ultimate rebuke. That will make a statement for the world.
is there a slight problem that we are dependent on the United States for a trade deal when we leave the EU?
Well, I wish we weren't in that situation, and I think this idea...
We are in that situation.
Would you
take I'm sorry, let me get the point. Would you take the risk of offending him so much that he said and started tweeting, oh, forget England and the deal, Britain and the deal...
He stood on the basis, David, of America first. The idea that he's going to ride to our rescue if suddenly all our trade goes once we left the European Union is for the start.
Henry Bolton.
Yeah, first of all, I don't think he's crossed a line, perhaps in some people's minds, but this is a state visit. This is not a personal invitation from Her Majesty to Donald Trump. This is a state visit. The United States and Great Britain have a long and shared history. We have supported each other through thick and thin. And like any family, we are going to have points in time when we have disagreements, and when we don't have disagreements, when we get on very well and when we don't get on very well. And it is about taking care of that relationship, and that is an important thing. This is not just the United States President, he is also Commander-in-Chief, and he is a significant leader in the world's largest superpower. Now, what I find interesting about this is that Britain First, by the way, is prescribed by my own party. You cannot join UKIP if you have been a member of Britain First, and along with a number of other right-wing parties. However, there is an underlying issue here, which is what is actually going on, and why has this become such a big issue? And that's another debate, and a broader debate.
Sorry, what do you mean, why is what going on?
Why are people so concerned about this, and why are...
About what? About Trump's retweeting?
Why is Trump able to be divisive about this? There are two things about this. There is the fact that Britain First are an outrageous right-wing party, but there is also, which I suspect he didn't know, and I hope that we don't see this again, but the other aspect of it is that people are concerned about a rising tide of Islam in their communities. Now, we cannot ignore that, and I am not anti-Islamic. I have got a lot of Muslim friends.
I think that's just playing up to Trump's bait and switch.
It's absolutely true.
That is appalling.
That's just absolutely...
You do not deal with hate by inciting hate.
I'm not inciting
and that
hatred.
Is what
No, I'm not.
That
is absolutely true. I'm not... What I'm actually saying is that we have to bear in mind that there are communities in this country and across the European Union that have concerns about the rate at which their communities are changing. And some international organisations that deal with security fully recognise that...
That's not what this is.
I just don't get, how do you go from peddling racism, misogyny, hate, and carrying on with the pattern of behaviour we see from the President of the United States to where you're coming from? It's beyond me. Just condemn it.
Sarah Baxter.
Well, I think Henry's talking nonsense. He's just responding in a really, really wrong way to a very crass action by the American president. That said, I think that Donald Trump should come here. He is the American president, and we should all tell him what we think about retweeting such vile racist stuff. I don't think that Britain should be turned into a giant safe space where we can't allow the president to come. Let him come. You tell him what we think of his tweet, and he can go home with his, our words of condemnation about it ringing in his ears.
The man in red pull over there, you sir.
Isn't Trump just right-wing politics without a filter?
Trump has never had a filter, and he does betray himself somewhat. I must say, I think it's very unfortunate that he hasn't found it in his heart to congratulate Meghan Markle and Prince Harry on their engagement that can retweet horrible racist stuff.
The woman up there on the left, I'll come to you again. Yes, with spectacles on.
Hi, I just got a question for the leader of UKIP, and I'm just wondering why he doesn't show the same loyalty to the EU as he does the America, and why we shouldn't stick by them as family. And also, don't we always get told that we are to ignore bullies to stop them from continuing to bully?
Okay, and the person in the back there, in the back row. Yes, in the very back row there. Yes, you.
As a teacher, all the time I have to be a role model for my students, as do my colleagues. And I think it's appalling that we're in a situation today where we've got the leader of the most powerful nation in the world being able to offend so many people and to actually create tension, to create aggression, and to create the very things that we, as a society, are trying to prevent. How on earth can we justify anything like that in the 21st century? I don't understand why we can even try and explain it, or, as Mr. Bolton tried to do, excuse it. You can't excuse that sort of behaviour.
Henry Bolton, do you want to reply to her?
I'm not excusing it. What I said was that I think there is an underlying issue as well that needs to be addressed.
There is.
There
Not
is.
like
And
that.
in that respect, I did say, I do hope very much that we don't see that from Donald Trump again. I said that. But there is also a deeper issue here that we do need to have a frank, honest and decent conversation about.
The President of the United States is supposed to be the leader of the free world. And there is a reason for that, because the United States has been a beacon for freedom, tolerance, democracy, the values that this country cherishes so much. He diminishes and undermines that role and that responsibility when he does the sorts of things we see him doing. And that is why we've got to call this out. Now, Henry, you've got this sort of illusion you're making, the other things. We do deal with extremism in this country. We have got our troops fighting people like Daesh and putting their lives on the line. But do not confuse that with inciting hatred, division in our society. That is not the same.
I know that, Sam, because I've done it. I've done it, Sam, I know. And what I'm saying is that there is a decent conversation we can have about the concern people have at the rate at which their communities are changing. Now, there is no reason why we can't have that discussion.
It's
But there
not
is
the
a
best
profound
way
difference, if I may say, between addressing concerns that people have and playing to their worst, speaking to their worst fears, trying to incite hatred out of fears in order to put them into the use, to invest them into a wave of discord, which, on the one hand, gives people like Donald Trump political power, while at the very same time worsening the causes of the discord and the causes of the concern within those communities. So, just one last point. Of course, Britain is going to have to deal with Mr. Trump, but to issue this invitation and to fete him in London at the Buckingham Palace in the House of Commons, that is an honour which goes beyond the demands of proper relationship between the Prime Minister of this country and the President of the United States.
Let me just go back to the questioner. Can I just go back to the questioner? What do you think of what you heard?
I agree with Sarah. I think he should come. I think he's poison. But he is the democratically elected President of the United States, and I think he ought to come here and face people and be asked tough questions. I think just non-platforming, I'm not comfortable with that. I think he should come.
Of course, he might not want to come if he thinks he's going to be protested against. He doesn't seem to like people protesting against him very much. And one last point, you, sir, there, you had your hand up. Sorry.
I was just going to say that I totally agree. For me, we're not just inviting Donald Trump, we're inviting the democratic elected president of one of our largest allies. And just to come back on Chucker's point, if the figures I've seen recently are accurate, we have actually a trade surplus at the moment with America, although it's a fairly modest sum of money involved, whereas obviously we have something in the region of 65 to 70 billion trade deficit on an annual basis with the EU, I believe.
All right. Well, you may be running ahead of the programme, because we may be about just to come to that. So let's pause there and we'll go on to our next question. But just before we do, we're going to be in Swansea next Thursday, and the week after that we're going to be in Barnsley. Swansea and then Barnsley. On the screen there is how to apply to come to Question Time, which I hope you may be able to do. Let's go on to Leslie Fisher's question then, please. And
Which
you'll
way
see
would
you
the
were
country
prescient.
have voted?
Hold on, sorry, yes. Go
Sorry,
again.
if I begin again.
Yeah, do.
Which way would the country have voted if they knew the divorce bill would be £50 billion?
Which way would the country have voted if they knew the divorce bill would be £50 billion? We were told it was going to be this week. Chukwuemeka.
I think the country would have voted to remain, and let me explain why. I mean, it's interesting, actually, the audience here is very representative of the country, because I see there are really strong views on both sides. But I'll tell you the reason I say that I think we would have voted to remain is because the Vote Leave campaign and its head, Dominic Cummings, was absolutely clear that they wouldn't have won the referendum if they hadn't made, or seemingly made, this pledge to put £350 million extra per week into the NHS. And obviously, if you're going to be paying a large divorce bill, you are not going to have that money to put into the NHS. And that's why I think that the divorce bill is very significant, because you've got these two new facts, which are right, we didn't really know about in 2016. Big divorce bill. Boris Johnson didn't say anything about that. That wasn't emblazoned across that bus. And now you're not going to get that £350 million extra per week going to the NHS. And in a way, I think it's symbolic for what is happening on Brexit. I think a lot of people bought this thing, maybe if I make the analogy of a car, nice shiny Audi, leather seats, alloy wheels, all the added extras. And now you've got the car, you're sitting in this thing, it's actually not an Audi, it's a clapped-out old banger, and it looks like it might break down. And there should be nothing inevitable about you having to buy that car if at the end of the process it's not going anywhere. So that's why I think this is important, and I think we should have an open mind about what happens on all of this.
And what would you like to see? What would you like to see happen on all of this, as you put it?
Well, I think nobody on this panel is going to say any different, wants to see the best deal for the British people. But increasingly, I think that Brexit, in the terms that it was sold to the British people, is proving impossible to deliver. Now, what we have to do as parliamentarians is try and deliver it in the terms that it was sold. Try and give you that Audi, as you like. But you can't change a banger into an Audi.
No, but you want to stop Brexit, don't you? That's your principal political ambition at the moment, is to stop it happening.
I certainly wish it wasn't happening. I think we do...
I didn't say that.
Yes.
I said you actually want to stop it happening.
I'd prefer it wasn't happening, but...
I know that. You want to stop it happening.
I want to stop a hard Brexit. But at the moment, we haven't exhausted this process. I can't say for certain what's going to happen, but I wish it wasn't happening. I think it will be bad for this country, bad for our economy. And yes, look, we've got problems in this country, but I don't think leaving the European Union is going to solve them.
Sam Jima, let's just go back to Leslie's question. If people knew it was going to be £50 billion, would they have voted that way? What do you say?
I think, looking at the polls, people would have voted exactly how they voted in the referendum. I voted Remain because I thought it was going to be costly and complicated, but I think it's patronising to say to the British people that somehow they didn't go into the referendum with their eyes wide open, that somehow Chaka knows better than all of that.
No, you're totally taking words out. That is not what I said.
So I think it's people went into it with their eyes wide open. There is a price to pay. Now, what is disingenuous, obviously, and my position is, the referendum has happened. We can either keep refighting the referendum, or we can move forward and do the best that we can of it. And that's what we do. I'm committed to delivering this referendum. It is disingenuous, as Chuck is saying, that the 50 billion, and no figure is actually being published by the government. This is the figure that the press is speculating about. It is disingenuous to say, if we were to pay a sum of money between now and transition and when we leave, which we would have paid anyway for all the benefits that we already receive without really knowing what the entire deal is, and that will obviously be conditional, we'll have to do, and we'll probably hand it over only if we get what we want, that somehow that is not right. So Chuck is trying to have it both ways.
But
He would have paid the money anyway, but he's saying now you wouldn't get it for the NHS.
But you say that,
And you
but
can't have it both ways.
David Davis said that 50 billion, that was rubbish, just a few weeks ago, the 50 billion. And wasn't there a government white paper that says, as we'll no longer be members of the market, we won't be required to make vast contributions? Is 50 billion not a vast contribution?
The government hasn't put forward a figure. This 50 billion is speculation in the press. But what I am saying is it is disingenuous to say that if we were to pay a divorce settlement, that we would have paid anyway if we were still in the EU, and is part of settling our accounts to make sure, but also to make sure that we got the deal that we wanted, given the British people have voted to leave.
Let me,
that is wrong.
Yanis, I'll come to you and then I'll come to you, Henry. Yanis.
Well, Britain is a country that respects contract law. And it was never going to be the case that it would not pay its dues to the European Union. I really do not believe that the good people who voted in favour of Brexit, I'm saying this as a Remainer, were ever fooled about that, or they ever expected not to pay the bill. Britain is not a strategic defaulter. But this is an irrelevant conversation. The overall effects of Brexit will have nothing to do with this divorce bill. The amount of money sounds like a lot, but it's puny compared to the present value of the effects of Brexit on this country over the next 5, 10, 20 years. So what we should be concentrating upon is, firstly, as Democrats, to respect the referendum outcome, even though I'm on the losing side, and I'm very, very saddened by the fact that Britain is leaving the EU, while at the very same time minimizing what is a process which I can only describe as a dog's Brexit.
Okay. Right. Sarah.
Okay.
Sarah, I'll come to you in a moment. Let me just go to one or two members of the audience, and then we'll come to you and Henry. The man in the white shirt there. And I'd like to go back to the question of Leslie as well. Yes, you sir.
Absolutely. I mean, even if we accept that it's £50 billion, it's a fact whether you voted Remain or Leave. It's a fact that we pay a net contribution per year of £9 billion. And the European Commission has talked about a 40-year payment period. We don't know what that is, but let's assume it's 40, even 30 years. That's about just over £1 billion a year. We pay £9 billion net. That's a fact, whatever side you're on. And the second thing is, if it is £50 billion, not only does that appear a bargain when you look at what we pay net each year, but this isn't a gift for a trade deal. This isn't us saying, well, we're going to give you this and then you're going to give us a trade deal. What this is us complying with our contractual obligations, which we were always going to do, to Yanis's point. But the key point is...
Didn't the Foreign Secretary say they could whistle for their money?
No, that's absolutely incorrect. What Boris Johnson actually said, and I would ask Choker to retract his comment that he made today on Twitter, what he said about that was that they can go whistle about an extortionate amount. You didn't put the full figure out there in your Twitter. He talked about an extortionate amount when he talked about go whistle.
All right.
This has to be taken into account.
All right, let me go to the questioner, Leslie. What do you think?
I think a lot of us on both sides voted on the basis of insufficient detailed information. And I do think that maybe it was our own responsibility to look into it in a lot more detail than we did. But I do think now people are thinking a lot more deeply. We've had a lot more information come out since we took the vote. I voted for Remain, and I agree with Chuka completely. I wish we'd never had the flaming referendum.
All right, okay. Well, if both sides voted on incomplete information, then the result might be exactly the same when they get full information. But no. Sarah Baxter.
Well, I also voted Remain.
You're
but I actually think
tonight.
that Chuka's completely wrong. First of all, no one voted for the referendum on the basis of 350 million for the NHS. Everyone knew that was rubbish right from the start. The next thing is, Chuka says he doesn't want a hard Brexit. Now, if we say, oh, we're not paying that money, that's the quickest way to get a hard Brexit. Britain's always been very honourable about its obligations. Yanis Varoufakis is right. We haven't always had a good deal back. So I would like to make that payment contingent on getting a decent deal from the EU and not handing over the money without some sort of quid pro quo. So we'll see what we get down the line on a trade deal. Meanwhile, I think a lot of the money is going to pay bureaucrats and MEPs for their pension obligations, including Nigel Farage, who's going to be supported for life by the rest of us. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in.
Henry Bolton.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? From the point of the referendum to the day we leave the European Union, presuming we leave in March 2019, we will have paid 22 billion to the European Union. And then there's the 50 billion, thereabouts, so that's 77 billion. And how much further is it going to go up? Because also we see that in the budget that Philip Hammond has allowed for, I think it's 3 billion every year with no end date to it. So what does this actually total up to? And to follow on Chuka's analogy, would you consider buying a second-hand car when you don't even know what make, colour or type of engine it has, what condition it's in, and yet you're still putting the amount of money on the table?
So do you object to the way that the government is negotiating at the moment?
I do, yes. And in fact, I'd like to come back to Yanis's point. A dog's Brexit. We gave the government a mandate to negotiate. The unfortunate fact of the matter is that our government seems incapable of negotiating. At the moment, probably not very many people in this room have read the position papers that have been sent by London to Brussels, but there is nothing concrete in them whatsoever. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that they have no negotiating objectives. It's not clear what the British government is trying to achieve. On the 24th of June 2016, they should have started work on that. They didn't. We've lost a lot of time. That is a problem for the government. And now what the government is doing is trying to move talks on by offering £50 billion. They are trying to use your tax. That's the equivalent of about £1,650 on everybody's income tax bill. And to say that this was foreseen, of course it wasn't foreseen. We didn't foresee that our government would be so incompetent as to not be able to negotiate any other way.
In fact, the Sunday Times said it was there was a secret deal to have this bill of 40 to 50 billion euros back in September, and a lot of what we've heard since has been pure noise. The EU asked for 90 billion. We said 20, we're splitting the difference. A lot of this is happening in negotiations behind the scenes by officials, not by politicians. I think a lot of...
I have to say that.
There's going to be a...
I worked in Brussels for 3 years.
So you know how that works?
I do, and I've negotiated for the European Union as well, not against Britain.
Who against?
I'm not going to say, David, but two countries. And the other day, I met with a very high-level European Commission official who is involved in these negotiations, and his comment was that they, after years of dealing with a country, Britain, that has always provided good, sound, logical common sense in all its dealings with the European Union, has now totally disappointed them. Okay. They are dealing with a government that doesn't know what it's doing.
The man in the blue shirt there, you, sir.
We're all on about this referendum. Well, the actual vote was so near, and so the majority so narrow. The election was so narrow, and such a small majority. She's damned if she does, and she's damned if she doesn't, because we've all got this nitpicking going on, and I would imagine them politicians over in Brussels are laughing at how we're conducting ourselves. We have voted to leave. We're going to leave. Get on with it.
Okay. And you, sir.
I'd like to ask Chuka. Two of the things that he said so far tonight. One is that he disagrees with the 50 billion. And the second one being that he disagrees with the lack of detail that came out at the beginning. If you disagree with the fact that we're going to pay this 50 billion, will you please tell us, in your opinion, what that 50 billion is going to get spent on? Because I don't know. And I can't make an opinion on that until I know what that's going to be. But nobody's telling me that.
But I'm really glad you asked the question, sir, actually, because I'm not saying I'm opposed to us meeting our long-term legal liabilities to the European Union. If you're a member of a club, You rack up a bill at the bar. You can't just walk out of it without settling it. So I don't have a problem with that. But the second thing I'd say is this. The reason I bring up the £350 million extra per week for the NHS, which this has a direct effect on, is not to relitigate the referendum. It's actually to hold people to account for the promises that were made. And this is the big difference, actually, if you like, between where we're at now and where we were last year. When we were debating this in the referendum last year, it was based on hypotheticals on both sides. None of us really knew exactly what was going to happen. What we now see are facts. We know facts are arising out of this negotiation process. And as the lady said at the back, this is far much more complex than anybody thought it would be.
Okay.
David, you said something about the number of Remainers here, and I think there are two types of Remainers. There are Remainers like Chaka who are still stuck in the groove of fighting the referendum.
I just want...
let me speak. Okay.
And there are Remainers who think the best thing we can do for our country, as that gentleman over there said, is to recognise that now it is us versus the EU27. It is not Leave versus Remain. And that, therefore, we should be looking at our national interests and seeing how best we support it. Of course, both sides in the referendum campaign came out with some wild exaggerations, and we all knew that the 350 million was hugely illustrative, whatever. But it is a fact, and I say this as a Remainer, that when we come out of the EU, eventually we'll be paying a lot less to the EU than we do now. That is true. And so, Chaka, what we should be doing is not fight the referendum, but actually focus on how we can get the best deal for our country.
But enough. But your government's taken the best deal off the table. That is the problem, Sam. If you're going to rip us out of the single market and the customs union, which you don't need to do if you leave the European Union, that's the best deal off the table.
The woman there. Hang on, everybody. The woman there, please.
I don't know how you can say that the British public went into it with their eyes open, given the lies and misinformation that was spread during the time of the referendum. And also, I have to disagree with Sarah's point, because as somebody who works in the NHS with boots on the floor in our hospitals, I can tell you that staff and patients were influenced by the 350 million thing.
All right. Henry, but I'll give one last word. Your spokesman on this accused the negotiators, I've got the quote here, of being quislings. Is that how you think of the people negotiating?
I wouldn't put it quite as quislings, no, but I'd like to ask
UKIP did. I mean, UKIP's man in charge of this did.
Yeah,
You're the boss of UKIP.
I am.
Should he withdraw this then? Because it suggests...
We could tone quislings down slightly, but let me answer this gentleman's question.
Quislings is the same as traitor.
Yes, let's tone that down somewhat. But the point is, that indeed there is some tendency towards that, because to answer this gentleman's question, okay, two of the things that some of this 50 billion is going to be spent on are projects relating to free Wi-Fi in Greek hotels. Sorry, Anis. And the other thing is, can you believe it, £450,000, which is not much out of 50 billion, I grant you, on projects to challenge Euroscepticism. Now, that's what we're going to be paying for, ladies and gentlemen. And what I'm saying here is, if we're negotiating to agree to go forward with paying for things like that, then Gerard Batten has a point.
But you have already committed to paying for those things, however ludicrous they may seem to you.
Yeah.
Right, but you do not want to default on your commitments.
The point about this, Yanis,
that have legal...
But this country's government should do exactly what it's got a mandate to do, take us out, and the only way that we're going to come out of this on the trajectory that you suggest, Sam, which is in the interests of this country, is defending the interests of this country and making sure... to do that, we need to make sure that we exercise a bit of British steel in it.
All right.
And we're not doing that.
Enough. We must move on. We're over halfway through, and every week we discuss this. And those of you who are here know that we discuss it every week, because you'll have heard it going on. Pearl Bent, let's hear from you. Pearl Bent.
Should we prioritise getting aid to Yemen rather than pandering to the Saudis and supplying them with arms?
Should we prioritise getting aid to Yemen rather than pandering to the Saudis and supplying them with arms to fight in the Yemen? Sarah Baxter.
Well, the Yemen certainly needs our aid, and what's going on there is an absolute scandal. And the country has been caught up in really a proxy war between the Saudis and the Iranians, and there is a big contest going on between the Sunni and Shia Muslims, and not one that we often hear talked about. Now, that said, Theresa May, I think, is right to be in Saudi Arabia and visiting that country. I think that at the moment it has a new leader, a very young leader. He goes by the name of MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and he is both an interesting and quite potentially dangerous figure. This is not a moment to be alienating MBS. It's a time to be watching rather warily in which direction he's going. He says he's for human rights, particularly for women, which is a good thing, but at the same time he's locking up members of his own House of Saud in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel and extorting money off them, ostensibly in a way of curing corruption.
Should we be providing £750 million of arms to the Saudi government?
I think this is not the time to make an enemy of Saudi Arabia. I don't approve of that.
Let's keep giving them the bomb.
No, I do not. I do not approve. There's only one thing that we know.
Nothing from Iraq.
No, look, there's only one thing worse.
We want to have more blood on our hands from the Middle East.
Yeah, there's one thing worse than what's going on in Saudi Arabia at the moment, and that would be Saudi going in the ISIS jihadist direction. And it is entirely possible that Saudi Arabia could go that way. And right now, I think it's better that they remain our ally.
More people in Yemen, to create more Islamic fundamentalism in Yemen, to destroy whatever is left of the image of Western democracies throughout the Middle East, to perpetuate a humanitarian crisis by becoming accomplices to the Saudis who are blockading existing aid packages going to the people of Yemen that are starving, all that in order not to undermine our relationship with the Saudis.
You, sir, over there. Thank you.
I don't believe the UK should have any further foreign entanglements in the Middle East, aid, military or otherwise, and I think we should finally withdraw for good from that region entirely.
Sam Gino, can you answer his point?
Well, the Prime Minister is travelling in the Middle East at the moment because we have a lot of important relationships there. We are a member of NATO, we are a leading member of the UN Security Council, we are one of the military powers in the world. We have an international role to play for good. In terms of the specific question about the Yemen, which is a humanitarian catastrophe, I think it was right for the Prime Minister, while she was on her travels, to actually ask for the blockade to be lifted so commercial vehicles could get in there and have vital supplies sent to the people of Yemen. The UK government does not supply arms to Saudi Arabia. There are UK companies...
You just lease them, you mean?
There are UK...
4.6 billion is the price tag of the lease.
Very smart. There are UK companies that manufacture arms and sell them. Obviously, they have export licenses that are granted by the government. Yes. Those export licenses are very carefully policed so that they're not allowed to sell weapons where they're going to be used for repression or where they're going to be used directly to harm people.
Does the government approve? Does the government approve of the use of the weapons that we have sold to Saudi Arabia being used in the Yemen?
Do you have agents there making sure that this particular bomb will not be thrown on this particular target? Because that would be amazing. You should bring them back to negotiate Brexit.
There are strict terms. There he goes again. There are strict terms around the export licenses, and we have relationships with a lot of these. I think it's what we've got to do is, and UK jobs depend on these, is to make sure that at the highest level, our foreign policy, our foreign secretary, our defense secretary are diplomatically engaging with these countries so that our diplomatic and foreign objectives are realized.
Yes,
but the gentleman's point about moving out of these countries completely, I don't think is right.
No, but can I just put the question, I don't know whether you caught it, that I asked you. You say the government issues licenses, and it issues them with care, where it believes
there are strict controls.
Strict controls, right. Given that the arms have been sent to Saudi Arabia in huge quantities with strict controls, one assumes you can control their use. Otherwise, there's no point in having these controls. Do you think the British government, by allowing these weapons to be used in Yemen, is implicitly supporting Saudi policy in Yemen and indeed allowing weapons made in this country to go there?
No.
What?
Well, there were weapons sold under certain strict conditions to Saudi Arabia at the time. I do not know what weapons Saudi Arabia is using.
But all weapons we know constantly having to be repaired. They have experts out there explaining how they should be used. It's an industry. And you can pull back from it or you can... I'm sorry.
To their non-use in Yemen. Can you say, as a government minister, that those bombs are not being thrown in Yemen? Can you say that?
That's something I can't comment on.
Well, that is the question.
Argument when you only have to look at the television and see those children starving, dying of diphtheria and diseases that no child should die from. It's a disgrace.
Chukwumuna.
Listen.
I'll come back to you. So go to Chukwumuna.
I think there is a big question mark over whether the arms which are being purchased, albeit from British companies, whether they are being used to repress people. And therefore, I think, at the very least, the government should pause and investigate what is happening here. I actually think there is a bigger question here about our relationship with the Saudi Arabian regime overall, because the traditional argument that is used against perhaps, how could I say, deploying a more robust approach to that relationship is that we've got strategic military and defence interests in the region, and they are part of protecting those interests. But increasingly, I found over the years, you know, if you look at so many of the problems that we are faced with, Saudi Arabia has very often been an incubator for those problems. If you look at the extreme strain of Islamism, I'm probably not describing it correctly, but the more conservative strain of Islamic thought, Wahhabism, that was incubated in Saudi Arabia, and that is one of the things that has led to many of the problems in the region. So I do question whether our approach, our foreign policy approach to Saudi Arabia, not just under this government, frankly, but under different governments, is actually the right one. And I certainly don't think we should be putting jobs before human rights. I have a real issue with that.
You stop there. And then I'll come to you, and then I'll come to you, Henry. Yes. You, sir.
The problem with if we don't, if we cease providing weapons and military training to Saudi Arabia, is what happens to that void. Someone will fill it. And that someone will be Russia, China, a country of that nature who will probably supply weapons which aren't perhaps, there may be a chemical nature or some sort of weapon which will actually cause greater harm than the weapons which we provide. We just can't comprehend what might happen.
So just because somebody else will commit a crime if you don't, you should.
All right. And over here on the other side of the gangway, and then Henry Belton, I'll come to you. Yes.
In terms of not sending aid at all into Yemen, what happens if everyone took that responsibility at that standpoint? There would be no aid going into there where there is already a major humanitarian crisis. So,
well, I don't think anyone's arguing against aid going into
Henry Bolton.
Yeah, I mean, the question was, that or the point was, I think almost, that we should not intervene in these places based on past track record. And I would entirely agree. And it links across to the weaponry that we provide with Saudi Arabia. And as far as I'm concerned, the weaponry that we're providing to Saudi Arabia, I mean, to equate that to, as Sam did, to jobs, it's lives. There are people dying because of those weapons, and you're saying it's people's jobs depend on them. But we are not good as a country, and we have not been for many years in dealing with our interventionist policies and approaches. Iraq, Afghanistan, 2 cases in point. In Afghanistan, the military mission was accomplished in probably about 6 months, a year at most. But we stayed there for years, getting involved in state building in a society and in a political background that we had no understanding of what we were dealing with. And that's the problem. And we have got policies of selling arms to Saudi Arabia and people dying as a result without any real in-depth understanding of what's going on there. And we are complicit, therefore, in what is going on in the humanitarian disaster. We need to really reevaluate how we conduct our foreign policy in such scenarios.
All right, I'm going to move on. Very briefly, if you would, just quick.
No one is equating jobs with lives. What is going on in Yemen is the responsibility of the Saudi Arabian government, not the British government.
If you're supplying arms to somebody, if I give you a weapon and you go and shoot somebody, then who supplied you with a weapon? Who's got a part of the culpability? Would you be able to shoot them without the weapon?
Saudi Arabian foreign policy.
All right, we have to leave it there to move on to another subject, which we had many questions on. Fiona Beardsley, please, let's have your question. Fiona?
How would the panel tackle the social deprivation, the high unemployment, low wages that are being faced by many of our coastal towns in the UK?
That was revealed by the Commission report on social mobility this very week. Sarah Baxter.
Well, I'd start with looking at education, because very often the coastal towns are falling behind in schools. Now, there are ways to reform that, and London's been pretty good at it, actually, by introducing a variety of types of schools, free schools, academies, etc. A lot of choice. I think standards need to be raised right from the start. We heard the Ofsted chief this week saying that early education is not good in this country. People aren't even learning the basics of reading and writing. Now, that's just at the very basic level. Take some time to work through. I'd like to see more investment. Maybe we'll come on to talk about the railways, but I'd love to see more infrastructure.
We'll talk about it now. You're free to answer the question any way you choose. If you want to talk about the railways, you talk about the railways.
Well, we're no longer living in that age of the car foreseen by Beeching, and I think we should start developing not just more branch lines, but also the HS3 connecting the, Liverpool to Hull and regenerate the whole of the north. I'd like to see a Yorkshire mayor. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I think that mayors can be, well, in my experience in London and in Manchester, they can be a good way of providing inward investment into a region and also generating a kind of cohesion and can-do spirit. So I'm for it.
Fiona Beardsley, what are you actually driving at here? What is it like? What is it that this social mobility report produced that you feel strongly about?
I mean, I think it's obvious to us in Scarborough that we know this is happening locally and we face these problems daily. Our young people can't find employment. Our employment is very seasonal. We are very isolated by our transport links as well, which deters businesses from moving here and investing in the town.
You, sir, over there, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree, because the major road that comes into Scarborough is the A64, and if you go down that road, there's sections of it that's a single carriageway, and if you go to somewhere similar, like, say, Blackpool, it's a major motorway going into Blackpool, so it puts lots of businesses off because it's just so difficult to get the transport in and out of Scarborough, and it's ridiculous that a town like Scarborough has such a terrible road going into it.
And you, sir, what do you think?
Yeah, it's about education. We, as a country, are short of skilled people. Now, at school, when we were at school at 13, 14, our teachers knew how far we could go. Now, I think at 14, most of the teachers should be able to tell pupils and say, you can go on, you will go to university. Some of the people who are not clever enough to go to university, but have got the hands and can go into trades. We're short of electricians, plasterers, joiners, chefs, nurses, you name it. And at 14, 15, they should start to learn.
And are you talking about the country as a whole, or Scarborough and
the country as a whole? The country as a whole. But Scarborough would obviously benefit as well.
All right. And can I come to the woman here? Yes.
Sorry, my question was relating to the 53 billion and rising all the time of HS2. Anyway, I mean, what benefit does the panel see that for the North East?
All right. Chukwumuna.
HS3, yes, but the whole.
I specifically mentioned HS3.
When's that going to be?
All right, Chukka.
So I'm quite nervous in replying to this question.
Why?
Partly, I'll explain why. Because I don't think it's... Part of the problem here is we try to do everything in London, in Whitehall, and to come and tell a community like yours here how to do things. And it seems to me, I mean, if you take an overview, I mean, it's shocking, really. We're the 6th most wealthy country in the world, and yet 1 in 5 people lives in absolute poverty. Over 14 million people are living in absolute poverty in our country, which I think is a disgrace. But How do you deal with that? You need proper local industrial strategies. And why I say you need to decide that here is that you know what it is about your unique geography, history and people that gives you a cutting edge and gives you a niche in a big global economy. I visited another area like this, Clacton-on-Sea, a couple of years ago, and they are going through change there as well. Was massively based on tourism before. There was a big Butlins there that shut down in 1983, and then they were left with not many new industries. But now, because of the geography and the place, they've turned it into this renewable energy hub, big wind farms just outside of Clacton-on-Sea. But they know how to do that, and I think what we have to do, people in the centre, in government, have to give you the tools to do that. But I totally agree with the point that the gentleman made about skills, and we've got to end the snobbery in this country that says if you go to university, that is better than becoming an apprentice and doing a vocational or educational qualification. And there's a really big problem there's a real crisis on the apprenticeship front, because over the last quarter, the number of apprenticeship starts has fallen by 70%. We're not going to solve these problems there with that type of thing happening.
All right, the woman here in the second row. And I'll come to you, Yanis.
I don't necessarily think that education is the answer. I have 3 degrees, and today I nearly didn't get here because I had to travel home from Newcastle, where I work, and the train got delayed. I travel up and down to Newcastle and up and down to London, and also around all of the coastal towns and cities in England as part of my job, and it's the same. It can take me 10 hours on a train to get from here to Cornwall. I can fly to the Middle East in less time than that takes. We do not have adequate transport links. It's just not there. And how can you expect investment to happen and businesses to want to develop in areas like this, regardless of what the business is, if they haven't got the ability to get there? And therefore, what's the point in being educated if you can't work where you live?
Yanis Varoufakis.
I agree with much of what I heard about the importance of strong regional governance, whether this is a mayorship or I would actually like regional assemblies. I would like a more federal kingdom to emerge and to complete the devolution that Tony Blair left incomplete. Infrastructure, education is an end in itself, and of course it has very good side effects. But I think that what our conversation is missing out on is that the situation in towns like Scarborough, like Clacton-on-Sea and so on, is simply a symptom of the chronic underperformance of the UK business model. You have a country which is chronically underinvesting in research and development compared to your main competitors around Europe and the world, in fixed capital, in infrastructure. You have wage stagnation, you have the most lopsided geographical imbalances of any major country in the world, worse than Italy, actually.
And where does the blame for this lie?
Well, let's not play the blame game.
Well, you have to play the blame game if you're going to resolve anything.
The fact that you had rapid deindustrialization in the 1980s under Mrs. Thatcher on the basis of what was a very clear attempt to diminish the organizations of the working class in Britain. The fact that you had growth based on financialization of the city, financialization based on council house sales, which of course then depleted the stock of housing. The fact that then you created an educational system, a higher educational system, a university system where young people have to become indebted before they even begin to consider entering the labour market. But let's talk about what needs to be done. And I need.
All right. Well, we only have.
I'll be very quick.
Very quick. I'm sorry.
Allow me to say something good about the government.
Allow me to say anything you like. So just be quick about it. That's all.
No, I read the industry policy white paper. It's actually quite good.
Okay.
Except it's missing an important point, an important part: funding. What you have in this country is about 900 billion pounds slushing around in the financial sector, needing to be invested in all the things that you are discussing. But in order to do that, you need a public investment bank And you need that public investment bank to work side by side with the Bank of England through a particular kind of quantitative easing.
I have to
in
speed.
order
I'm
to
sorry.
deal with the problem.
I have to speed you up. Sam
And I'm
Dimon.
afraid that only Jeremy Corbyn will do it. Because your government doesn't have what it takes to realise the importance of closing the loop that you started.
Sam Dimon.
Thanks, Yanis. The lady's question was about social mobility, and social mobility is your chances of improving your life, whatever circumstance into which you were born. And the report that came out this week showed a mixed picture. Ironically, despite what Chaka said, the report says it's not a north-south divide then. What the report said is you've got quite a mixed picture across the country. And Scarborough was in there, and I think the education was highlighted in that report. And that is why there is £72 million going towards specific areas in the country, of which Scarborough is one, to help really improve the quality of education. But I'll say that the situation is not all that bad. I had a look at what's been happening here on my way up. And £1 billion is going into the potash mine. That's going to create 1,000 jobs locally. I think that is great news. McCain's is investing £100 million into Scarborough. I think that is also good news. But I'm not saying that is all. I think the lady's point about infrastructure, I really, really appreciate. Because I missed my connecting train, and I was worried I was going to miss the show today. So that is definitely something that we can do more well.
Henry Bolton, you have to be brief if you will.
I will be. The nature of coastal towns is that they're 180% or 180 degrees surrounded by land, thereabouts. The rest, they don't have access. So to compete with inland towns, they need double the investment for access. The other thing is traditional industries in those areas, in coastal towns, have been reduced. What about the fishing industry? Lowestoft, for example. Correct. And what Chaka says about having to listen to coastal communities, you know, I totally agree. But the reason that coastal communities are in the state that they are is because successive governments of different colours have been ignoring the concerns of local communities for too long, on everything from infrastructure to jobs to education to the rule of law. So it's a succession of problems.
Our voice about fracking for long enough as well. We don't want it. It will ruin our agriculture. It will ruin our tourism. But this government is determined to do it, and we don't want it in this country.
All right. No fracking, but you're in favour of potash.
No, absolutely
Against
not.
potash as well. The woman here, and we're pretty much coming to the end. The woman here on the side. Yes, you quickly.
I just want to agree that I think a lot of the trouble on the coastal communities is that the government think they know what's best for us without asking us what's best for us. Even to the point where they said you can have electrification of the railway line from Liverpool to the East Coast, except it wasn't. It was going to stop in York. At the moment, we can get right through. When we get electrification, we will have to change trains.
OK. Now, look, we've got to stop, but I want you to hear Vicky Blake's question, and you can all answer it. Vicky Blake, just ask your question, if you would.
Is Theresa May being mean-spirited by not giving the country an extra bank holiday for the royal wedding?
Right. Hands up those of you who would like an extra bank holiday for the royal wedding. Only half of you. The other half will stay at work. OK. Why not? Thank you very much. And on our panel, hands up for a...
Why not?
We'll give you
why
four.
not? That's why not.
They'll get married at a bank holiday.
OK. That really is time up. You're not for bank holidays, obviously, you know.
The Troika has banned all bank holidays.
Yes,